Hello friends, today I'm going to share my 3-step framework for preparing for podcast interviews. Today I had the privilege of being interviewed by Carmen from the Asian Business Owners Podcast. I'll put a link down in the description. We had a great chat. It was pretty short, only 20-30 minutes, and the goal was to provide a lot of actionable, practical tips. So we talked about public speaking, we also talked about personal branding. This framework is a great way to make sure that you are well prepared for a podcast interview. Now it's not so much about making sure that you say everything that you plan to say, but every time you do the work in this way, these ideas become more consolidated, more clear, and so that when you do go to the podcast interview, you're more likely to deliver confidently and at a higher level. So this is a really great way to build your speaking skills with every high-stakes speaking situation that you encounter. So I'm excited to share it with you. Let's dive in. Introducing the AEA framework. This stands for Answer, Evaluate, and Ask framework. So this is great for podcast interviews, and this is just what I do. It's very intuitive, nothing too crazy going on. Let's jump in. So step number one, obviously, you want to answer the questions. You want to answer the topics. So Carmen gave me some topics, some things that we wanted to talk about. The number one mistake people make when speaking in public, things to keep in mind when pitching, which I actually crossed out because pitching is not really my expertise. So I felt, okay, that's not really appropriate. 3 quick fixes to apply now and 1 exercise to practice. Great. So I just go through. I use something called the narrow structure to organize my answers. So I make sure that in context, I explore context at the beginning of my answer, establish a main idea, give details and examples, and make sure that I summarize and reflect. But here I'm basically getting my answers down, making sure it's all nice and clear. All right, so then once I'm pretty happy with those answers, I'm not writing all of it, I'm just getting a good idea of what I want to share. The next step is then now to evaluate and enhance for ethos, pathos, and logos. We want to optimize for persuasive impact. Now, if you're not familiar with ethos, pathos, and logos, ethos is really about how we establish credibility. Pathos is about how we appeal to the emotions of the listeners, and logos is about how we appeal to logic and reasoning. So fundamentally, we want to make sure that we have balance of these 3. And if we had to choose, we want to make sure that we've got plenty of ethos and pathos, because these typically will generate a more powerful response in the audience. But because I'm a coach, I also want to make sure that I'm establishing strong logos so that people trust me as a coach. And that then also feeds into my credibility. So what I'm basically doing is I'm scanning through what I've written above, and then I'm going to add certain sentences or things just to make sure that every answer has some sort of balance. So little statements here, like based on the fact that the majority of my clients are Asian, I want to call out and name specifically the kinds of clients that I work with. And knowing that this is the Asian Business Owners Podcast, I assume that most of the people listening will be Asian business owners. And so this then aligns and that makes them feel like I'm talking to them. Also establishes my credibility in terms of what I'm going to share. And it's really important that we establish credibility early on in our answers so that people are open to the message that we share. Next, this was just organized in a way that I feel was logical. And then for each of these, I'm adding a story. I make sure there's a narrative there. So I had a narrative in mind about me being a classroom teacher. And then I just practiced that, saying it out loud. I had a narrative here around how I've worked with hundreds of professionals and the pattern that I see when they come to the very first lesson and what that looks like. Awesome. Got the practical tips there. And yeah, just making sure I got a story here. And I was pretty happy with that there's balance. Now the goal was for me, I didn't have that much time. I really only spent about 30 minutes preparing. So I just wanted to run through and get comfortable talking about these fluently. Step number 3, ask. So we're actually going to ask AI for possible follow-up questions. So all I do is I copy this, I take it, put it into AI, and then I have a general prompt saying, what follow-up questions would you ask as an expert interviewer? Something along those lines. And then it came up with all of these themes, which I thought were cool. So I just read through them and got a feel for what types of questions might be asked later. If I wanted to be really, really thorough, then I could go through and do the same thing, answer these questions, evaluate them, and then even do more follow-up questions. But in the time that I had, this was enough. And I felt pretty confident talking about the topic. Now, as it always happens in these situations, there's always other questions. Like we ended up talking more about personal branding for a while, which is fine. And I felt I was pretty prepared. I didn't necessarily, like in hindsight, like I could have been a little bit clearer on some of these. I probably didn't do enough establishing credibility because it felt quite relaxed. But these are things that if you plan, you practice, and you say them before you actually do the interview, it's much more likely that these will come out and you'll build habits that way. So that's what I mean by using this as an opportunity to improve your skills, not just going in with the default that you have. We want to make sure that we're enhancing them, maybe using new narratives and being very targeted about what it is that we want to say. And then whatever happens on the day, we want to make sure that we are nice, cool, calm, and collected And that is the most important thing, that we're conveying positive vibes through the camera, and we're not looking really nervous or stressing out about which word I said or whether I used enough logos or anything like that.